Hey kids, before we dive in, I'd like to give big ups to Magic Spoon for sponsoring today's episode. It's no secret I loves me some cereals, so it's why I've been enjoying the magic that's contained within these spoons. They have 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and are only 140 calories per serving. And they're also keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and are very low in carbs. What they ain't low on is taste. I've been enjoying the frosted version as well as the new honey nut flavor. Ooh, how delightfully devilish, Matthew. Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee, so if you're not satisfied, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. So, if you want to get some fun new options for your midnight snacking, order yourself a box or build your own variety pack, and to save $5 off that order, use the code McMuscles at checkout or go to magicspoon.com/McMuscles. Thanks again, Magic Spoon, and without further ado, let's start the show. Welcome back to another perfectly cromulent episode of What Happened, the show that is unfortunately accruing more and more rare-focused episodes. We've tackled Fox McCloud and the Clonosaurus, Killer Instinct, kinda, and hell, even GoldenEye 007. Oh, speaking of which, coming hot off the heels of GoldenEye moving over 8 million copies, Nintendo were very interested in continuing the relationship with Bond. James Bond, as Tomorrow Never Dies, was just about to hit theaters. There are differing stories as to why Rare didn't make a direct follow-up, with one interview via Rare Replay saying that Nintendo was outbid for the rights by a certain group of electronic artists, and a separate interview with The Guardian where Rare staff said they had little interest in another 007. Regardless of which is more accurate, we got the clunky and multiplayer-less Tomorrow Never Dies. Probably one of the bigger cases of whiplash gamers experienced in the late 90s. Rare were actually fine with this, because with everything they had learned on GoldenEye, it would probably better serve them in the long term by applying that same experience to a new self-owned IP. This resulted in the sci-fi infused, conspiracy-laden Perfect Dark, an incredibly impressive N64 showpiece released in the console's twilight years. Sales were on the lower end when stacked against GoldenEye, but the game was universally lauded for its massive amount of features and options, especially when it came to multiplayer. As soon as Secret Agent Joanna Dark snuck into stores, the team transitioned onto Dolphin dev kits to explore what was possible on Nintendo's upcoming Cubic machine. Fans got a tease of this at 2000 Space World Expo with a slick 3D render of Joanna, all but confirming that she was headed for next gen, and then, well, a lot of stuff happened a lot of quickly. What was going to be a straightforward follow-up jumped across 3 different consoles, saw multiple reboots, extended delays, and still released to somewhat of a mixed reception from fans and Rare employees alike. So pull out the laptop guns and polish your far sights. It's time to find out what happened to Perfect Dark Zero.
Act your age, Joanna.
While Joe's Space World 2000 appearance didn't include a proper announcement, rumors of a sequel began to solidify in 2001, when Nintendo inadvertently leaked a list of upcoming titles, including Perfect Dark Zero and 1080 Snowboarding 2. Months later, in January of 2002, IGN reported that PD0 was already in trouble, citing vague issues with the project that was significantly slowing things down. Certainly not the best look for a game that was still yet to be officially announced. Soon after that, the team would hit another tiny little snag. After an intense 3-way bidding war, Microsoft had purchased Rare. While Perfect Dark Zero had apparently only really been in the prototyping phase on GameCube, once the ink on the contract was dry, the team started fresh on the OG Xbox with a new focus on online play via some type of new service called Xbox Live. The project would see a few core elements carry over. The name, obviously signifying its prequel status, and a drastically different art style, which we'll get into in a bit. Like many employees at Rare, the Perfect Dark team wanted to hit the ground running, and progress quickly ramped up into building something tangible, which is where the screenshots you're seeing right now come from. This anime-inspired art style was something that was first explored on the GameCube, and they doubled the hell down on it here. This makeover was kept secret until Rare saw fit to publicly share a glimpse of it later in 2002 via this art of Joanna, and even in the earliest days of hot gamer takes, this design was not received well at all. So what happened to the original look from the first game? Former concept art lead Will Overton explained in an interview with ByteSector. Right from the beginning, we wanted to go down a more stylized route. Not that we were sick with the super realistic way everyone seemed to be going, we just wanted to do something different. We kinda wanted to bring her back in line with the way Rare do things. In fact, it's slightly more oversaturated, a bit more colorful with everything, and make her more stylized as well. Even though it was pretty blocky in the N64 one, she was still a pretty much normal shaped human being. We wanted to stylize her a bit and make her more iconic, if you like. As development continued, the team fleshed things out on the OG Xbox, with various things shifting along the way, including Joanna's design. Rare had clearly taken note of the public backlash towards the Aaron Esurance look and slowly started blending both anime and Western comic book sensibilities. This wasn't the first time Rare had pivoted on character designs when public discourse was heated enough, mind you, as they also famously redesigned the heroes of Jet Force Gemini to look slightly less Cocomelon-ish before its final release. On the content side of things, the team went hard on online multiplayer. They apparently had gone as far as making 50-player online deathmatches a reality, but unfortunately, it was apparently not the most playable thing in the world, with Rare's Chris Tiltson saying that the graphics just couldn't handle it. On the other hand, the team was incredibly successful at implementing a fully online-enabled co-op mode for the main campaign, which, if it had been released on the original Xbox, would have been one of the earliest games to offer such an option. Now, if you notice the "had been released on the original Xbox," you'll know what's coming next. Since the Xbox 360 was rushed to retail in a bid to beat Sony to the punch, a lot of games were not going to be ready for day one, leaving a bullet-shaped hole in Microsoft's first-party launch lineup. Halo and Gears were far off on the horizon, so Microsoft had no exclusive action game, which, considering their target demographic at the time, was a bit of a massive problem. So instead of trying to rush titles out the door that weren't ready, it's likely that they looked at what was being developed on their older machine that could be delayed and ported to the 360. Perfect Dark Zero was apparently only a year or so away from being complete when Microsoft floated the idea of it becoming the showpiece action game for a console that would deliver storylines and gameplay so compelling that it will feel like living a lucid dream. By the way, if this sounds exactly like what happened to Cameo Elements of Power, another 360 launch title, it's because it was. You might think giving devs an extra year to work on their game is a blessing, and in most cases you'd be right, but when that includes porting to a completely different system, adding more features, upping the graphical fidelity, and carrying a launch on its back, by that point, well, it starts to turn into more of a curse. Unfortunately, even with the extra time to make the launch, cuts were necessary to get it there. Multiplayer matches were dialed down to 32 players from the prototyped 50, the first game's popular counter-operative mode was intended to return before getting cancelled, and finally, a completely new feature called Datadyne TV, which would allow users to upload and share match replays online, was even cut out completely. Maybe someday we'll achieve a dream like that. This rush to hype PDZ as the hot next-gen game also resulted in some snafus, headlined by the infamous Wall Guy. This was a Microsoft-approved PR shot that obviously did the game no favors when it was trying to position itself as a bleeding-edge shooter. This man of the wall, along with the PS3's Box Guy, represent the golden age of video game memes/shitposts, which, looking back on them now, was a much simpler time. Anyway, the team were working up to the 11th hour to get the game out the door, and it was so close to the wire that the decision was made by Microsoft higher-ups to forego waiting for the pre-certification process and to print 700,000 physical discs anyway. Having some experience in the QA field myself, at the time, let me tell you, this was absolutely balls out insane. Typically, we go through a certification process to get a game finished, and then we release to manufacturing. If the certification has not passed, we would have had hundreds of thousands of discs on our hands. It was us taking a risk to get the game there day one and there for launch. The team had been going through the game over the last few weeks to get us to a point where we felt really comfortable. Rare does a lot of work in terms of polishing the game, so we felt pretty confident it was time to let it go. Just to further convey how messed up this was, you go ahead and print a bajillion discs, and then after a round of testing, you find out the game crashes 100% of the time at the end of Mission 3, which can totally still happen on Final Code. You then have a bajillion coasters you can't sell, taking up warehouse space. Also, remember, this was way before the time of the day one patch, so that's how tight things got for Perfect Dark Zero. Thankfully, the game was devoid of any major issues, so this was more of an interesting tidbit rather than a tone setter for the next paragraph or something. Once it got into the hands of review outlets, the reception was actually mostly positive, though there was an underlying sentiment that PDZ wasn't as impactful or memorable as its predecessor. It was the fans that seemed more disappointed in general, with many begrudging the art style, tone, story, controls, and lacking the je ne sais quoi appeal of the 2000 original. Over time though, and after the blockbuster launches of Gears of War and Halo 3, which became the console's must-haves, PDZ started to accrue a much harsher reevaluation. It's just kind of interesting to see how many have looked back on it in a much worse light the farther we've gotten away from its surprisingly positive launch. The game sold through over 1 million copies in less than a year, securing it an ugly new box and a spot in the Platinum Hits line. While complete lifetime numbers for the game are non-existent, Rare staffer James Thomas mentioned it did cross the 1.5 million mark in an October 2007 interview with Gamasutra, now GameDeveloper. Rare's Chris Tiltson shared that PDZ only had about 25 staff members working on it at most, and that it had quadrupled the budget Microsoft had allocated for it. The issue was, though, that AAA games were getting a whole lot more expensive to make, and those numbers paled in comparison to some of the other exclusive heavy hitters. Gears of War would sell over 2 million copies in less than 6 weeks, and Halo 3 would sell over 3 million copies in less than 2. This is gonna come back up later. Rare, however, knew that since Perfect Dark was one of their more recognizable IPs, and that its genre was a good fit for Microsoft's portfolio, they wanted to push forward with a true sequel, as it would have had a pretty good shot of getting the green light. Or would it? Rare turned to Chris Seavor, creator and voice of Conker, to be the head of a new Perfect Dark project. Chris threw himself into the task, crafting an intricately designed multi-part story structure that would span 2 chapters. The games would have been Perfect Dark Core and Perfect Dark Vengeance, with both exploring a grittier take on the series. According to Liam Robertson's reporting on Unseen64, Chris's proposal for Core was a globe-trotting sci-fi action thrill ride that picked up Joanna's espionage career years after that whole misunderstanding with the Skadar, and would have featured more aliens, plot twists, and betrayals than ever before. It was gonna ditch the anime aesthetic with a greater push towards realism, with Joanna becoming the polar opposite of her younger, peppier Zero incarnation. Rare management was excited about this pitch and believed in what the team was coming up with, both on a creative and business level. This was because the 2-game structure was going to be modeled after film series like Harry Potter and The Hunger Games. The plan was to immediately launch into developing Vengeance just as Core would have been wrapping up, reusing the same technology to dramatically improve their development efficiency and to hopefully avoid letting staff go during downtime. As soon as you'd finish your work on Core, you'd move immediately onto Vengeance. Chris's bosses, the Stamper brothers, however, had gotten used to how Microsoft operated and wanted to ensure that until the game had an impressive vertical slice, it needed to be protected and kept off the books as much as possible. During the later half of Core's unfinished development, the Stampers moved more and more staff onto other projects in a bid to keep PD Core low cost and away from Microsoft's burning gaze. If they caught wind of it too early, there was a chance of cancellation, given the somewhat unofficial state of the game, and if you know anything about this era of Microsoft, they loved rejecting Rare's pitches. You could fill an entire console launch lineup with the amount of titles that they had passed on. Then, in late 2007, a meeting was held between Microsoft top brass, the Stamper brothers, and Chris Seavor with the goal to get the game greenlit. What ensued was a long meeting, with Rare's side trying desperately to big up the game's selling points, which ultimately proved pointless. Microsoft, from the very beginning, had already made up their minds. They argued that the sci-fi shooter space was already being covered by Gears and Halo, and that those were all they really needed. They also pointed out that Zero's sales were dwarfed by those other two franchises, so it didn't make much sense to invest in more Perfect Dark at that time. Ultimately, the final word came down from then head of Xbox, Peter Moore, who obviously agreed with the above points. While the game was scrapped, some of the nuts and bolts were still good. So good, in fact, that some of PD Core's underlying tech was used in Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts. Yes, I covered that one. Other ideas from Perfect Dark Core were split off into two completely separate pitches, one a survival horror game and the other a new platformer, both of which were also rejected. This story, along with many others that involve Rare, is a real heartbreaker. They're a studio that have so much potential, but as Microsoft was moving into the motion-controlled revolution, publicly they seemed less and less interested in the style of games Rare was known for. While their release schedule has slowed down significantly, the most recent release, 2018 Sea of Thieves, is still sailing along incredibly well, receiving significant updates to this very day. The jury is still out on their next title, Everwild, though, because there have been multiple reports and rumors that that game's development hasn't been the smoothest, unfortunately. As for Perfect Dark, though, thankfully, it's coming back with a full reboot by way of the brand new AAA studio, The Initiative. And Crystal Dynamics, too. They're co-developing it. That's cool, a little odd, but Oh! If you know of any other fussy FPS foibles, let me know in the comments below, over on my Twitter, or push a hover gurney with an alien on it into the Flophouse VIP Patreon and become a big boss and nominate what you want to see in the future. See you next time, and thanks for watching!